I left the city, I've been browsing, treading water that they drowning. My head on the swivel, yeah. It's only real in my surroundings.
Hello and welcome to episode 133 of the Smash Accept podcast. I'm your host, Michael Royer. You can find me on Twitter at DynastyDadFF. If you were following me at Dynasty_DadFF, let's switch it over. Got rid of the underscore. Guys, by popular demand, last week we had a absolute fantastic podcast talking about pre-combine with my man Dynasty Zoltan. We hit it ahead where we were saying Richardson's going to move into that next tier. So many different things. If you guys haven't heard that, go back and check it out. I know I kind of already stole the thunder by saying he's in there, but welcome back to the show again. My man Mike Jirai, Dynasty Zoltan himself.
Hey man, how's it going? Yeah, I'm excited to be back, and I hope everyone listened to last week because you would have known that the 106 is going to have a crazy amount of value, and all I saw after the combine was everyone talking about the 106. If you listened to our podcast last week, you would have known that on Thursday and gotten that leg up on your competition.
And I made 3 trades to do it. I gave up a late second from 108, and the guy's like, "This is a great class. We're foolish." I'm like, "Yeah, I think I might know a little bit what might happen here." And it was like,
and we're going to get into startup ranks in a little bit, but 106, that's going to be a top 40 pick maybe in Dynasty drafts now.
As of right now, like the current ADP that we put together for Smash Accept, at the 106 is going around pick 409. That ain't going to last. And the pick 108 is going around 609. So, it was like a matter of moving up. Given a second-round pick, there's a huge difference between some of these rookie picks, and we're going to get into that. We just did an entire podcast on Smash or Pass, really talking about the rookie pick or the player value. But what I want to talk about, and I want to pick your brain because we did a fantastic pod a couple months back talking about that year one punt, and I think so many people, we talk about it, they don't have a game plan going into the draft. And yes, you have to be fluid, but talk to me about your initial game plan because I think you and I right now, and I've really adapted a lot of your style in how I've drafted because I used to be a win now dad. I was like, I might not live to be 50, so I got to get some cash. But, there is a way to come out of your startup where, you don't have to win year one, but it's going to be fruitful.
Yeah, absolutely. And the best way to do that is to target players who are undervalued for one reason or another. Now, the top ways that a player could be undervalued are they are injured or suspended, so they're not going to be playing. They were in a really poor context last season, so looking at guys like Drake London, or there's potential that they'll be in bad context for next season. So that's the number one thing that I'll do, or target those types of players. But the way to do that is with trading back. So I think the key in these drafts is you're not looking to give up picks. Like I'll have people ask me, should I give up a mid 4th rounder for a 24 first? Looking where the 23 picks are up, that would be a good value next year on average. That's not the way to do it because now you lost that pick altogether and you lost any upside that you would get. Instead, what you need to do is you need to move your 3rd rounder for a 5th rounder and a 24 first.
Absolutely.
A guy in the 5th round who might have been the guy you would have taken in the 3rd or has at least as much upside, and you're getting on a 24 first for free.
Yeah, and speaking of 24 first, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Andrew Edwards, 17. My man's got 9 firsts in Smash 8 startup. He broke my record of 7. To your point there, though, it's like I think we need to look at first, what is a 24 first worth? Because I feel like everyone now in their startups is like, oh, it's worth the same as 23 first. And no, it absolutely is not. Because if you look at it and you say, my 24 first is worth, X. So right now, like 110 is going in the 6th round. I'm comfortable paying, I feel like it's in that 6th to 7th round for me. But I'm seeing people selling their 20 or their 4th rounder for a 24 first. That's a 106 or 107 right now. That is going to hurt. Like if you have the ability to see right now 106 has got to be Jahmyr Gibbs or Jackson Smith and Jigba. He will be worth more than 124 first next year. Like that's just where it is going to be. And I think people just get excited about that. Like they just want to take that 24 first and buy a pick or sell a pick for that. And like to your point, the way you insulate in a draft is you trade back. So, you're at 108 and Jamar Chase is on the clock and you want to move back to 212 and get Amon-Ra St. Brown or Garrett Wilson and that 24 first. Now you've insulated that. Now you've taken it to a point where I feel like Amon-Ra St. Brown and Garrett Wilson both, increase in value. And then you get a 24 first because not every class is going to be this way, but we've been talking about it for years. We're 23 firsts. We knew we're going to be worth top 50, 60 startup picks. Tell me a little bit about, by the time this is all said and done, how many guys out of this 23 class will be top 4 round picks?
So it's going to be 6 automatically, and it might even be 7 or 8. The way that it gets to 7 or 8 is if Addison or QJ goes to Kansas City or Buffalo, or if we see a guy like Charbonnet even go to Buffalo, then we're going to see Charbonnet going, where Najee Harris is going, which is basically the 412. Looking at 2024, though, I've made a few straight up trades, usually in the 7th round for a 2024 first. At that point in the draft, we're at, the 112 or the 201. That's where I'm comfortable just giving a pick straight up.
Absolutely.
But you're right. I mean, 2024 is going to be valuable. We know there's at least 3 superstars in that draft with Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams, and Drake May. So it's going to be valuable if you get one of those top 3 picks. However, if someone trades their 2024 first, you have to think about what you're giving them. Especially, let's say you trade a 5th rounder straight up for them. In that 5th round, they can take a guy like, Tony Pollard or Ramondre Stevenson or, a DJ Moore. And they don't have their first. So they're going to go win now. It is very hard to acquire a 2024 first and have that be a top 3 pick because there's probably 2 or 3 people in your league tanking. Part of the way to avoid that issue is to do what your guy did in Smash Accept and acquire 9 of them. And then some of them I'm sure are going to be pretty good. But in any single given trade, you have to think about you're giving this guy a leg up on the rest of the league. You're giving them an extra, startup pick, and they're going to be motivated to take older players. So you have to factor in it's probably going to be 107 or 108 on the stronger side. So moving 106 this year for that pick, it just isn't worth it.
And I look at it the similar way that I do in a trade. When we're talking random trades, I say that's the 108 to 110 in my head, because if it's a random pick and it becomes the 106, then I win. But if it's the 108, I broke even, and I think a lot of people just try to over project those random firsts and try to make them a big deal. On the flip side of what you're saying, if you pay that 24 first for a 7th rounder, and let's say, in that 7th round, you draft Derrick Henry, and Derrick Henry gets injured week 3, he's worth nothing. He's going in that 7th round, and you lose and it becomes the 103. The 103 next year, just like this year, will be a 2nd round startup pick in my estimation. I think Marvin Harrison and Caleb Wilson are going to be 2nd or 3rd round picks, and May as well in that same area.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the reason why it's so good to acquire those 24 firsts is even though I just said, like you have to assume that they're playoff firsts, it is that upside. You have no way in the 6th round right now, if we're looking at who's going in the 6th round, there's no one there who is ever going to be top 24 in startup value.
Absolutely, yeah.
I don't unless, Christian Watson turns into Justin Jefferson, there is basically no way to get top 20 value in that round. If you get a 24 first, it is possible that that's top 3. So you have to think of that upside both when you're buying and when you're selling. So I wouldn't necessarily give up a 24 first for a 5th round startup pick just because then I have to go all in because otherwise I'm going to be giving up a good pick. So I don't like limiting myself by trading a 24 first. But you have to think when you're acquiring one that the team you're getting is probably going to win.
So I think the trickiest part to me, and let's start out with the year 1 punt, because I mean, that was a great podcast we did. If you guys haven't done it, ask either of us to see some of our 1 year punts because they're set up to win for the next 10 years. No, it's not that bad, but I mean, it is literally loaded, and some of Mike's really are what motivated me because I was watching him do it, and I'm like, dude, my man just drafted 101 through 106 last year, and the biggest problem I have with people, they're looking at me right now and they're like, yo, Dad, that you just got a bunch of picks. Those picks can increase in value. Your guys we talk about Rashad White or Joe Mixon or Derrick Henry, they might go somewhere different. They might get more back, competition in there where the 106, the 107, these picks are only going to accumulate in value. And I think the trickiest part is trying to figure out where that is. So when you have a startup, I think the place you can move back the most and make the most money and really get yourself set is if you have those top 5 picks. Yeah. And I know it's really, really difficult. I mean, extremely difficult to move off of Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert. Last year I was doing that and I was drafting Jalen Hurts, and that's how I made dominant teams. This year I traded back. I had just to give an idea, and I want you to talk a little bit about those quarterbacks and what you can get out of them versus the risk of giving them up. But I traded the 101 for the 111 and 112, moved around just a little bit, and ended up getting Justin Fields and Jamar Chase by adding a second in there. So, I gave up a 24 first. So I gave up a 24 first in Josh Allen, but then ended up getting Jamar Chase and Justin Fields, who I think, are locked and loaded in there. The tricky part I get into is so many people are like, well, what do I ask for? How far do I move back? Like where? And to me, it's like, I'm willing to move back to Fields and Lawrence and maybe even Deshaun Watson, but I don't want to move back into that area where it's like after Dak Prescott, it becomes a no man's land where Trey Lance, Tua, and then no other quarterbacks till round 6.
Yeah, and that's what's really difficult. I mean, one thing I'll add is that with the rookie picks in the drafts, you do have picks 2, 3, and 4, which will become quarterbacks. So those are added assets that you can get if you trade back. But I completely agree with you. I wouldn't be trading back. The best asset that I get needs to at least be a second rounder. If I'm getting, let's say the guy with the 206 wants my pick. I can get the 206 and the 307 and a 2024 first. I'm taking that for anyone, even the 101 Patrick Mahomes, because then I can end up with the 102 and take the best quarterback in this draft. I can end up with a top 6 wide receiver. I can get Chris Olave or Drake London or Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I'm getting a 24 first. That's the type of value I'd be looking for. But in terms of what I really want to do is I want to trade back to the 107, 108 range, because then I can get my Lamar Jackson, my Justin Fields, like you were talking about, because there's just not that big of a gap. So I actually ran these numbers earlier today because I got a question from one of my patrons about, which of these top 12 quarterbacks to value. So Josh Allen over the last 4 seasons has averaged 24.9 points a game. Lamar Jackson's at 26.8. Kyler Murray is at 23.7. Justin Herbert's at 23.9. Dak Prescott's at 24.0. And Deshaun Watson, including this last year, is at 25.0. All of those guys are within a point of Josh Allen. And you can move back 10 spots, definitely get one of those guys, and add on a 24 first plus. That is the type of move you want to make, because Josh Allen is never going to be more valuable than he is right now, because it's literally impossible. He's the 101 or 102. Meanwhile, Deshaun Watson, he was going as the 103 last year, so he could easily be back there again. So you got to step back, look at some larger sample size of numbers, and figure out you can give up 10 spots, 12 spots without giving up anything.
And I think a lot of analysts out there, they say never sell Mahomes, never sell Josh Allen. And I don't think they're volume traders like you and I are, because they feel like that loses out immediately. But to your point, I feel like you get to a spot where if you can add that much onto Deshaun Watson, onto Dak Prescott, onto the 102, 103, I think that's where you really start to add some value. I only have ever owned Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow through the rookie draft. That's it. Because if you invest startup wise that way, especially moving up. I mean, if you are paying that much, if you're giving a 2, a 3, and a 24 first, you have holes in your team. You really do, and you're going to try to find ways to make it up. One thing that I like to do, and I did this in Smash 3, was I moved from 101 to 108, and then moved from 108 to 212, added two first round picks, and then in that particular draft, I took Jalen Hurts. So it was like Jalen Hurts and 2 first. Man, did that pan out. But the 102, the 103, the 104, you're getting in that second round, early third round, and Richardson has put himself into that tier now where it's like you have 3 quarterbacks where I want to hear a little bit about your thought process, because we talked about it last podcast. Deshaun Watson and Dak are going around the same spot as the 102 and 103, and the 104 is in that same area as Trey Lance and Tua, and I think it's really there's some strategy to play in there. Would you rather have the 102 Dak and Watson, or would you rather have the 104 Lance and Tua? So let's do both segments, starting with the 102.
Yeah, so first of all, you talked about there's about, a 15 to 18 pick gap right now between between the 104 and the 102. I expect that gap to
Oh, it's
dissipate.
going to close. Yeah.
It's going to close because everyone's going to have their preference, whether it's Stroud, Richardson, or Young. Some people are going to love even Gibbs or JSN up there.
Mhm.
It's really going to close. So, my number one piece of advice right now, if you had the 102, move back to 104, move back to 106.
Mhm.
I always say my key to my fantasy success is not being picky, right? I'll have anyone on my team. I am fine with that.
Mhm.
So, I'm going to have my preferences between Young, Richardson, and Stroud, but ultimately, I know that even people who do this professionally, who have trained quarterbacks for the last 30 years, they get it wrong.
Yeah.
So you can't have an ego and assume that you know who's going to be the best of those three. You should have a process. You should do the homework, absolutely. But step back for a minute and realize if you can get value from moving back, that's the way to do it. So
And I'm right on board with you. I think they're going to fall within 6 picks of each other in the startup. I think the question I've been getting before was how do I move from 104 to 102, and that was before Richardson was in that area, before they listened to our podcast and before the combine. Now that there's 3 quarterbacks in that tier, firmly in that area, what can you look to add moving from the 102 to the 104? I've been telling people if you can get a 203 or 204, if you can get in that range, I'd be willing to move that way. But I think all 4, we're going to have 4 quarterbacks taken in the top 10. I think Will Levis is going to start to push himself up as well. But what would you need to move from 102 to 104 right now?
So from 102 to 104, I mean, as I said, I'm not going to have a huge preference there. So if I can get an early second, like you were mentioning, which is going to turn into, the tight end 1 or 2 of the class or the RB 4 or 5 of the class, I'm totally happy doing that. And I would make that trade. What I would even look to do there is give up, let's say 102 and my 24 second for someone's 104 and their 24 first.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about the first for second swap all the time.
Yep.
You can sell this to the guy as I got the 102. I'm not going anywhere. You're going to get the 202 from me next year. Your team's sick. You'll give me the 110 and it'll be a good trade for you. But you're getting all that upside because the best a second can be is 201. The best a first can be is 101, which is 10 times more valuable. So
the other thing I had with that,
and like that,
we talked about it last week. There's that 109 is that we talk about 110 to 204 is nice, but 109 is going to be something special where I was telling people, listen, if you can go from 102 to 104 and then change it from 109 to 204, you just went from the end of one tier to the end of another tier. You skipped a tier, and then in your first round pick with that 102 to 104, you're in the same tier, but then you move from 204 to 109. That's massive. But it doesn't seem like that to a lot of, I don't want to say casual owners out there, but it doesn't feel that way, but it really is.
Yeah, and that conversation about tiers can bring me back to our startup discussion and where the real move is to go into drafts. So we talked about how those QBs are so valuable, and what I would recommend is moving up into the first or the early second, trying to get 2 of those QBs, and you can move back later, and it won't matter nearly as much. So looking at my startup rankings, I have from the 204 to the 310 in the same tier. That is massive. You could get a 24 first plus from moving from the 204 to the 310. So if you can move up in the first round and take that sacrifice in the second round, and the thing that you want to do is you want to do this early. You want to do this before you're on the clock, before people see who's available, because at the 204, right, you might get Breece Hall, who is your RB1, and that's great. But at the 310, you might get Kenneth Walker, Christian McCaffrey, or the 105, which is Jahmyr Gibbs. And listen, you might prefer one over the other, and maybe you should. But again, you got to be not picky in this situation and think of all the extra value that you're going to get moving back in that range.
Yeah, and worst case scenario, like the mocks that we've been doing, it's Saquon Barkley in that area because Walker's been moving up.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right there. And we were talking about that on the last pod. Is for me, it's a move up early and then it's a move back late, because what I want when I'm doing my startups, and I know you're the same way, is I want those 2 quarterbacks. I want those young elite wide receivers. That is really the way to win in Dynasty. You build around that, and then you get your running backs in the rookie draft, and you get those things. And even in this particular draft, I mean, if you went and you had your 2 quarterbacks in the first round. Round 3, you go London. Round 4, you move around and you try to get Olave. Then next thing you know, round 5, there's the 108. There's guys like Ramondre Stevenson. And then round 6, I'm moving back because for me, after round 6, it's like the difference between Chris Godwin at 605 and Jahan Dotson at 806. In my evaluation, is Chris Godwin's worth the 110 and Dotson's worth the 201. And people are not seeing that because it's 3 rounds. So take that situation, try to sell your guy. You'd be like, hey, I want to move from the 4th to the 2nd, and I'm going to give you from the 6th to the 9th. 2 rounds here, 3 rounds there, or something in that area, really to frame your work around to get those young elite wide receivers, to put yourself in a situation to get the Wilsons, the Lundays, the Olaves, as opposed to trying to stretch for guys a little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. And all that you're saying, it's completely accurate. Like the last draft that I did, people who went in the 6th round included Russell Wilson, Chris Godwin, David Njoku, and Jameson Williams. If we move back 3 rounds and look at the 9th round there, we have guys like Darren Waller, Jahan Dotson, and Derek Carr going. Mm-hmm. So those are 3 guys at the same position. In October, those rankings could be reversed, right? Mm-hmm. Like those quarterbacks, wide receivers could easily go above the guys going 3 rounds earlier than them. You just have to keep telling yourself, no matter all the work you do, you know less than you think you do. And that's why I'm always moving back. I'm always trying to get assets. One of the things that I do, because I track all my drafts very closely, is I say, how many more picks do I have by round X than I should? And my goal is always by round 10, I want to have made at least 14 or 15 picks.
Yeah.
And that's the goal. That's what you got to do, because some of your picks are going to bust. Some of them are going to get hurt. Some of them are going to go to jail. Like, we just don't know at this point. So you got to insulate the value and just pick for upside by getting more and more picks in really the top 10 rounds is where the upside really exists.
I'm right on. Like, I don't feel successful unless I have at least 10 in those 12 picks, and then because most leagues, you're going to start 10 guys. So if you get those amount of assets, you're in an area where you can package up post-draft. You can have that little bit of depth in there. And I think by the time you get past the 10th round, and I think what people don't really pay attention to is after that 10th round, they are the equivalent of maybe the 206 in a rookie pick or later. Yeah. So we were talking about it before. It's like once you get to the 14th round, those guys are worth 3rd rounders. Like they are literally, we're making some stabs at it. We're making some passes. And I think when I'm on the clock, I think this is something that people need to realize where you find your tier. So for example, I'm sitting there at, let's say 505 is Michael Pittman. I'm sitting there at 505 and a guy wanted to make a trade up. And this is almost identical to how it went. I moved back to 512, did a 24-2-3 swap, and got an 8-10 swap. So I moved my 10th round pick to an 8th rounder. I got another rookie pick. And at that area, you can get Christian Watson. So you just moved, you're in the same tier, but you moved that other pick earlier and you added those rookie picks. And I think I've seen you do that a ton of times where it's like, when they're on the clock, everybody wants to win. If you are the person that can sit there and be patient and say, you know what, I'm going to move, I have no problem moving back 10 spots now to move up 4 rounds later, and people are just hungry for those kind of picks. Tell me a little bit about how you navigate that, because I think until you do draft after draft after draft, people are like, well, and I get the offer where it's like, I want to move up to here and back to there, and that's just not how it works.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the key that I've found is documenting everything you do, and then you can look back later. So I'm looking at a draft I did a few weeks ago, and I did one of these cascading trades that you were talking about. So I get
all excited when you use the lingo, man. Insulations, cascades.
So I started off with the 207, right? I traded the 207 and the 807 for the 304 and the 504. Then I traded the 304 for the 309 and the 1004. Then I traded the 309 for the 409 and the 510. How that trade ended up happening is I moved the pick that became Christian McCaffrey for Travis Etienne, Trey Lance, and Tony Pollard. These are the types of trades where you just move back a little bit, and all of a sudden, it'll be the 15th round of the draft. Someone starts looking at all the teams. They're like, what the hell? How did your team get this stacked, right? Like, I did a similar trade there. I moved the 407, which became Stephon Diggs, for the 507, the 707, and a 24 second. That became the 109, the 112, and a 24 second. No one's trading Stephon Diggs for 2 firsts and a second.
Right.
But before you put names to those picks, people are just like, shit, Stephon Diggs is the last great receiver on the board. I'm going to do what it takes to get him. So you really just, what I do is I map out, if I'm moving back 10 slots, I map out the worst case scenario. Who are the next 10 picks that could go, oh shit, I got sniped on every single one. And I say, even if this happens, I'll end up with the 109. And at the 707, worst case scenario, I'll end up with the 201. Is that worth Stephon Diggs to me? Yes, it is. Okay, I'll do it.
I love that because I think I shared it with you where I did that 7 times. I cascaded back from like 203, and I ended up making that particular pick worth 4 firsts and the 108. And people are like, how do you have all these? And I'm like, each time everyone wants to move up, but it's not a matter of like just trading it straight out. It's moving from the 203 to the 308, and then moving from the 308 to the 505, and then moving that, and then it just kept snowballing. And then when you set yourself up as that guy who's willing to move back, people come to you and they want to move back. And then they also assume that the market better than they do, because I find so many people struggle with what that market value is from novice leagues to straight up sharks. Like they're trying to figure out what those values are, and we definitely have it for you guys in both of our Patreons, both in the Smash Patreon and your Patreon as well, of like how to make these kind of moves, because I think people just struggle with it in general.
And one thing I like to say, obviously it depends on the round, but I consider a fair trade, if you're let's ignore future picks for the moment, just startup picks, you need between 2 to 3x multiple of what you're giving up. So if I'm moving back from pick, let's say 20 to 30, I need to get 30 picks worth of value because I just gave 10 picks up in value.
Absolutely.
And those 30 picks need to happen between 30 and 60, right? I can't move back from 120 to 150, right? Because that doesn't do anything. So that's how I generally look at things, just to give a basis to it. But it has to be way more specific than that. And you have to just map out every single offer you get, try to put names to the numbers, and just remember that if you're not picky and you're down to move back, like this one league I did, I had the 607. I moved back to the 704 for a 24 second. And then I moved back to the 712 for another 24 second. And I ended up getting Nick Chubb at the 712. Now, I'm punting this league. I'm not trying to win this league. Why am I taking Nick Chubb? Because I know I can move him for a 24 first. So now all of a sudden at the 607, I had people offering me a 24 first. I could have done it right then, but I got 2 24 seconds to move back, and I know when August comes around, I'll get a 24 first for Chubb. And my punt is still on. I took Nick Chubb, knowing that he will never play a snap for my imaginary team.
Yeah.
But you got to take what the value is there.
I think the cascade that I made originally was I went from Javonte Williams at 505, got a first, moved back to 608 for Pollard, and then moved back again for Aaron Jones in the 9th. And people are like, Dad, why did you draft Aaron Jones? It's like Aaron Jones had an extremely efficient year last year. And when people forget, because Dynasty is so cyclical, when they want to win again, they're going to prefer an Aaron Jones. So then I'm going to flip him for more capital, and you just keep working in that area. Because I think most years I look at it and I'm like, I got to compare when that guy's on the clock. So I'm looking at the 107, and do I want the 107 that's going to appreciate in value, or that veteran who's currently worth the 107? Yeah. And 9 times out of 10, it's the pick, and I know you've been diving into this class like big time. I think every single one of these picks in that first round is going to increase in value from where we are now until when we get past that draft. And I'm just excited to see where it goes, because the part I'm seeing is everybody wants picks 101 through 109. I have done 2 startups, and I have gotten 110 through 202 exclusively to myself in both drafts, because nobody wants them, because they're like, oh, well, the 110, this isn't 2022's 110. This is 2023. Like, have some understanding of what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the area where we have to remember the draft hasn't happened yet. So one thing I actually want to talk about, because I went over this earlier today, was that when you're in a draft taking draft picks right now, not specific rookies, those draft picks have way more value than if you were to take a specific rookie, because you get to make the decision of who the most valuable player is at the time of the rookie draft. So
right.
you have to think about the 110 right now. You're like, ah, shit. Okay, the top 6 are gone. I bet Charbonnet, Johnston, and Addison are going to be gone. I don't want to take Sean Tucker. I don't want to take Josh Downs, like whatever. The 110 still has an incredible amount of value because there's going to be a player drafted higher than we think. There's going to be a player who runs a 4.3 at his pro day out of nowhere. There's going to be a guy who ends up going to Buffalo or Kansas City or the Eagles running back. Like, this is going to happen. So when you take these picks, you're getting all this upside that you don't realize later. I looked at the ADPs last year from before May, and these are just I did 18 startups last year, which is too many, but let's ignore that. So I did 10 before the rookie draft and 8 after the rookie draft. The ADP of the 110 last year before the rookie draft in my drafts was in the late 7th round. After the rookie draft, it was in the late 5th round.
Wow.
So I just got, if you took the 110 in April, in March, you just gained 2 rounds of value for doing absolutely nothing.
That's absolutely beautiful because I've been taking them everywhere. The thing that I look at is like, you and I have talked about it off air, but like right now we talked about the 110. Right now the 110's going at 6'10" in that area, right around the same area as George Pickens, Pat Freiermuth, Kenny Pickett, and it's like, okay, so if I'm in that spot and I want Pat Freiermuth, which is fine value, and George Pickett, which is in that same area, or Kenny Pickett, now I take the 110. I'm open to everything, right? Yeah. I can take whatever position I need. I can trade it. Everyone wants rookie picks. Not everybody wants Pat Freiermuth for their build. Not everybody wants, like that's not the perfect example, but when you take a player, even more so like when we talk about the 106 right now, the 106 is going sandwiched in between Josh Jacobs and Devontae Adams. Ooh. Like that pick is going to increase in value. But when I take that 106, I could take a quarterback could fall. I could take, it's going to be, it could be Levis, it could be JSN, it could be Gibbs, I have options and everybody's going to want to move up, and I can move back from 106 to say 110 and add value, as opposed to how far back are you going to move off of Devontae Adams and get that kind of value?
Yeah, basically right now most players are priced at their ceiling, with the exception of the injured guys like I was mentioning earlier, and most picks are placed at their floor, right? Mm-hmm. We were talking earlier today, I think it was 202 or Rachaad White was our discussion.
Right.
Listen, best case scenario, Rachaad White doesn't have someone drafted above him. I mean, they're going to sign or draft someone. So let's say it's just Damian Harris or Tank Bigsby in the 4th round, right? That's the best case scenario. And at that point in time, Rachaad White might be worth the 112 or the 201, let's say. Mm-hmm. But if Rachaad White does get any of, Bijan, Charbonnet, Evans, Tucker, etc., drafted to his team, or if they go out and they sign a big, free agent running back, then all of a sudden he's worth the 210. So you just have to think about these picks are going to be undervalued, and players are always risky. Players can always get injured. They can always get traded. They can always have someone else traded to their team. Picks are just completely value insulated, and that's the way you have to think about it. The other thing I love about owning picks in the draft is that if you're in a rookie draft, people are going to be coming to you with picks because it's harder to be creative with player trades in a rookie draft. Let's say I had the 106 and JSN's on the board. I'm not going to be going to, the Devontae Smith owner and trying to do that 1-for-1 because I'd have to go to every single team, look at a player who might be worth the 106. It's a difficult thing to do, but I might be going to the guy who owns the 109, 110, 111, trying to move back and pick up an asset. So when you're in the rookie draft, you really need picks to be in all the movement. And like we talk about as serial traders, the more incremental trades you make, the better, because you're picking up little amounts of value every time. And you want to be in the game to be able to do that.
Well, serial trader makes it sound a little bit more like killers. I like the volume trader. But I mean, I think I came to you 3 times this week. We were just talking and I was like, yo, do I take the 110 or this guy? And then we talked about, we got to the 201. I moved back. It was the 201 or Ayuk. What situation? Ayuk could be worth the 112 max.
Yeah.
But, something happens there. Same thing with Rachaad White and Bateman. And there's so many guys there where it's like, you have to understand the fluidity of the pick. You have to understand that pick can be something different. And I think that you hammered that home absolutely perfectly, because I think a lot of people struggle with that. Like, they just can't look at that rookie pick and know that it has value.
It's basically, would you rather have a $60,000 car or would you rather have $60,000? That's right. The question you need to answer yourself in almost all of these spots, unless your league is ultra sharp and drafting picks as early as they should. But I've yet to be in a league that does that. So until I find one of those, you should be taking the $60,000 cash.
Especially because as soon as you drive it off the lot, it's losing money
100%.
the entire way on there. I'm really interested to see where those situations where those tiers are where you need to move into, like we talked about the early area. I want to really concentrate on rounds 3 and rounds 4 because I feel like rounds 1 and 2 are chalk, like they're going to be pretty consensus. But when we get to 3 or 4, I think this is where you can really make some headway. This is where you can really change your draft because some teams start to really get excited and try to win now, and they're trying to get McCaffrey in those areas, and other people you can tell where they're at. So a little bit about reading the room by rounds 3 and 4 and how you start navigating from there.
Yeah, so in every draft, I would love to trade my let's say 5th and 6th rounder for a 3rd and a 9th, something like that, right? Because I'm wanting to get into that late 3rd or early 4th range, because that's where the real values are. As I mentioned earlier, I have a big tier from the 204 to the 310, which means at the 310, you're getting guys like T. Higgins, Drake London, Chris Olave, the 104, Trey Lance. You're getting these players who could easily have second round value literally after 2 weeks in September. So what I want to do is I want to get into that late 3rd, early 4th range, and I want to get out of the late 5th range, because in the late 5th range, what we have all of the running backs who have question marks, whether it's Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, Tony Pollard. You have some of the wide receivers who you might be high on, a guy like Christian Watson or Jerry Jeudy, but realistically, are you that much more confident in them than Marquise Brown 35 picks later, or Jahan Dotson or Rashad Bateman, 3.5 rounds later? You shouldn't be. So
Right.
What I want to do is I want to get into the last of those elite level assets, which ends at about 36 to 40, depending on the draft, if guys like Travis Kelce and Saquon sneak up in there. But I'm trying to get in that top 40 or so picks, where the worst case scenario is I get, Jahmyr Gibbs or Jackson Smith-Njigba.
So I'm glad you brought that part up, because I know it's a trend now. I don't do a ton of them, but the 3-round reversals, to really offset the idea of that the 101 is worth so much more than the 112. Given the fact that your 3rd rounder is going to look something like, Drake, if you're looking at that 301 range, you're looking at maybe a Garrett Wilson, an Amon-Ra St. Brown versus like 312. Is it as big of a deal as, saying that your tier goes all the way to 310? Is it a big a deal where I see people, I do all of our drafts Kentucky Derby style. So,
Yep.
You pick 1 through 12. I want some strategy in there where it's like you pick whatever pick you want, right? But I see people taking the 12 pick over, say, the 103 overall.
So in certain years, that's the right strategy. This year, that is really, really dumb. I'm not sorry to be so blunt about it. But first of all, you need to know that there's someone in your league who will give an absolute haul for Mahomes, Allen, or Hurts. So if you can get one of those picks, I never intend to actually take the player, but just know whether it's at the draft or months later, you're going to get a haul for one of those top 3 quarterbacks. And then, like you were mentioned, even with the 3rd round reversal, picking at the end of the 2nd, that's a bit of a damage, right? Because you're missing out likely on guys like Watson, Kyler, Prescott, guys who might fall, especially those wide receivers. But given the picks now, you might be getting the 103 or the 104. You might be getting Kyle Pitts. It's not that much of a drop-off. And the drop-off from the 301 to the 312 is literally non-existent. I mean, trade value-wise, there's a drop-off, but you're looking at, Garrett Wilson versus T. Higgins. Yeah, you should have a preference. I prefer Garrett Wilson, but in reality, there's not that huge of a difference when you're talking about the difference from Patrick Mahomes to Deshaun Watson from the 1-1 to the 112. So I'm all in favor of getting earlier picks now, especially if it's a top 3 pick. Now, the question gets a little bit more interesting when you look at, 108 versus 111, something like that, because I do love the value knowing that if I'm at 111 or 112, I can go Kyler and Deshaun basically every time, just because that's where or Kyler and the 101, something like that, just because I know that's where they're going. My tier drops off at the 15th pick, so if I can get 2 of those, I'm pretty happy with that. But I would absolutely not give up a top 6 pick if I could get it.
Yeah, and you want to try to get up into those first 2 rounds for your quarterbacks, because this year even more so than there's such a, we talked about a super flex super shortage, but it's like there's such a divide right now. You get your Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Burrow, Herbert, Lamar, Fields, Lawrence, Kyler, Watson, that area. Then you get your Dak, Tua, and Lance, and then you don't have a quarterback go for 4 rounds plus until you start to get the Cousins and Daniel Jones. And then there's another two round gap. So I find that I talk to a lot of people and they're like, Dad, I'm scared, man. I only have Lamar Jackson. That's my only quarterback after 4 rounds. What do I start doing? Just be patient, right? Like, I see so many people start stretching and moving Kirk Cousins in that same value tier as like the 106. And I talk to them, I'm like, would you trade the 106 for Kirk Cousins if you didn't feel like you were desperate? The answer is absolutely not. Like, you're not trading. And then, so take the 106 and then on draft day, we'll play around with it. But so many guys are really stretching for that quarterback position, especially after, Tua and Lance.
And shameless plug for my Patreon. I got the 106 at pick 36 right now, and I have Kirk Cousins at pick 73. So, But you're completely right. There's a scenario where Kirk Cousins, I've seen Kenny Pickett go over Stephon Diggs, right? Mm-hmm. I've seen Geno Smith go over guys like Deebo Samuel. It just, you don't need to be making these moves. It's okay. I never draft for need. I don't even consider it when I'm in the draft, because there's going to be so much trading going on between now and August or September when you actually need to put a lineup together. You should be taking advantage of other people's needs. So one of the things that I've noticed in startups is tight ends go way too late. It's an absolute joke because no one thinks about tight end. It's the last position they fell. And there's always, 6 or 7 people in the league who don't want to spend up on a tight end, which isn't the smartest move, but that's okay. And guys like David Njoku, who I have valued as a 7th rounder, end up going in the 10th and 11th round. Mm-hmm. So what I do is I stack tight ends. There's some leagues that I'll get Mark Andrews, Dallas Goedert, Greg Dulcich, David Njoku, and Darren Waller. And you know what? People are going to come to me over the next 5 months asking for a tight end. Right. And even though I have 0 quarterbacks right now, or 0 running backs more often, that's okay, because I didn't overdraft I didn't draft Dalvin Cook over, Dallas Goedert. And then if I feel like it in 2 months, I could trade Dallas Goedert for Dalvin Cook in, 2 seconds or something. So you got to be position agnostic as well. It's tough to do, but you just have to try that.
Well, and the tight end position, it's almost similar to that quarterback position, right? You want to get up into that elite, or you want to wait, and I think the Kelsey, Andrews, and Pitts are going in the 3rd. Goddard, Kittle, and Hawkinson are going in that 4-5, and those guys get difficult. But I find that Freiermuth keeps falling back. Waller, Dulcich, Schultz, and Njoku, and Okonkwo, Kmet, McBride. I mean, like, what I say is, if I don't get that top 3, stack up who you have there, start to play around a little bit. And I think you're right. I mean, tight ends become a value because everyone's really focusing in on those other positions.
Yeah, and one of the things I want to mention as well with the 1-year punt is that a lot of people are saying, I don't want to take Treylon Burks because I think he's going to have a big year and I don't want him to screw up my 1-year punt.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, the year that Treylon Burks would have to have in order to screw up your 1-year punt, you'd be thrilled about rostering him. So my strategy with these 1-year punts, first of all, I'm position agnostic during the draft, but before the season, what you do is you shed one position. The best position to shed is running back. The second best position to shed is tight end. Before the season, if you get those to 0, you will absolutely have the least potential points, which I know is how most dynasty leagues do their draft order. If you do not, last year I had several leagues where I did not roster a running back, and I had 5 top 20 wide receivers, and I was way behind on potential points because you're getting a 0 at 2 spots. So that's how I would focus on doing that from a positional perspective.
I love that, because I preach that all the time. I mean, when we talk about the rebuild process, or the year 1 punt, you create that positional void at running back. Mm-hmm. Last year it was disgusting who I had at running back, and people were like, why aren't you drafting a running back? And I was like, and are you, from 17 legs last year, 14 in the first, second, or third, and then 3 of them I got the 101, and all the ones I got the 101, okay, I didn't have a running back, but guess what? Now I got Bijan. You know what I mean? Like, we're in a situation where that's how you create that void, stack around those young quarterbacks, those young wide receivers. And I see a lot of people when they're doing their year one punts, Mike, where they're like not getting a quarterback. And I say, you have to have the pieces around it, add the tight ends late, because right now, aside from Andrews and Pitts, you can buy any tight end you want for a first round pick. Like, I mean, Kelsey is in the right situation, but the rest of them you can get for, I bought Dallas Goedert for the 111 today. And I feel like you can buy those type of players late. That's the final piece of the puzzle. But don't be afraid to not have a running back. I mean, if you're in a year one punt, you're not competing till next year, right? We talk about teams not having sexy rosters right now. If you looked at those rosters, and I can send them to some of you guys because you've asked, they were trash. They were wide receivers, they were quarterbacks, no running backs, and almost every single one of them, I have the 101 and the 105, and you better believe I'm going to be taking Bijan and Gibbs. And now all of a sudden I went from absolutely horrible at that position to stacked.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm looking at one of my 1 year punts right now. I got Tua and Lance at quarterback. I got Amon-Ra, Drake London, Christian Watson at wide receiver. And then I got 6 first round picks this year and 4 first round picks next year. That's, I got my 2 quarterbacks with upside. I got my 3 wideouts with upside, and I'm going to supplement them with 10 first round picks over the next 2 years, including the 101 next year, because my best running back is J.D. McKissick, who I'm looking to flip. So that's how you got to build stuff up. And one of the things that, talking about running backs in particular, it's just by far the most volatile position. I mean, you look at a quarterback, Trey Lance hasn't played in 2 years and he still has top 40 status. Meanwhile, Jonathan Taylor had a slightly down year and he dropped from the 105 to whatever, the 210 that he's at now. You look at even players who had career years like Josh Jacobs, Ramondre Stevenson, and Tony Pollard. They can't get above the 5th round in startup value because they're such risky assets playing on the franchise tag. Maybe their team drafts Bijan Robinson, right? Like, the running backs are just so risky with no floor, and all of their upside, which they have, is production upside. Like, if you drafted Josh Jacobs last year in the 6th round, you got a year of RB1 production. That is awesome. But his value barely increased. So when you're doing a 1 year punt, you're only looking at value increases and you're not looking at production. So that's why you want to avoid running backs and take these high upside wideouts, these backup quarterbacks, these backup running backs, and the athletic tight ends like the Greg Dulcich, David Njoku's.
I am blown away at Trey Lance's value right now. I'm seeing right now he's going late 2nd, early 3rd. And he's also going in that same range as the 104, 105. And I just feel like it's riskier. You can reset the clock and get Richardson, get Stroud, get Young, and it gives you a much better opportunity. I feel like the ceiling on Trey Lance is fantastic. The floor is much lower than any of these guys of what kind of situation they're going to be put in. Another thing I like to do, and now we can just kind of spitball. We were kind of scripted, having fun there. It's like, so today, I drafted Cooper Kupp in the end of the 4th because I was like, hey, I think I'm going to be a pretty solid team, because I already had taken, at that point, I had Fields, I had Jamar Chase, Breece Hall, and Drake London. So I'm like, okay, I'm feeling really good. I'm trying to push my picks up. I think I can take Kupp here and flip him, but I was like, see, once these guys start to establish where they're at, then you look at these teams that are win now. You see those guys that are always trading up, that are making moves, that traded their 24 first, that drafted Derrick Henry, that drafted Joe Mixon, that are in that area. And I looked at the one guy and I was like, I ended up trading Cooper Kupp for what ended up being Jamison Williams in the 202. Do I like Jamison Williams? Not necessarily, but that kind of value is what you look to do sometimes, and you can flip guys when you see what their direction is. I mean, I feel like so many dynasty owners are like, oh, well, I'm win now, so I have to take this player. Or I'm in a punt, so I have to take this player. Value is value in March, right? Like, it's not locked in that I had to keep Cooper Kupp throughout the entire season or until I figured out where I was at. So I want to just encourage people on that. Like, don't get locked into it completely. I mean, take the value where it lies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you do make a good point about, there are certain players, guys like, there's really 10 to 15 high leverage assets who only 3 or 4 teams in the league want. So we're talking your Kupps, Kelce's, Adams, McCaffrey, those types of guys. they're really only going to be 3 to 4 teams who are going to pay market price. So one thing that you want to do is if you take a guy like Cooper Kupp, you do want to move him early, because if you tried to make a trade with that person that you traded with now, I bet he wouldn't have taken Jamison Williams or the 202 because he's going to win now. Absolutely. So by you trading for those picks, rather before he's made them, you're able to have the flexibility to make better choices than he would, because, or maybe not better choices, but just choices that fit your build better. So
right. And that's when we talk about moving up in that area, right, because I want to move up from 412 to 308 and get Drake London. Yeah. And then, how much of a difference is there really? You look at Adams and Kupp, they're going in rounds 4, right? Yeah. They're going in the 4th round. But then you look and you see Keenan Allen going in the 10th. You see Amari Cooper going in the 9th, Mike Evans going in the 9th, DeAndre Hopkins going in the 9th, and how much different is the longevity of their career and what they're going to give you at this point? Because sometimes you have to look at, what is this player going to do for me? I mean, yes, Cooper Kupp could play till he's 32, 33 years old, but on the flip side, so could DeAndre Hopkins, and right now they are going 8 to 9 rounds, or at least 7 rounds different.
Yeah, and guys like DeAndre Hopkins and Amari Cooper are good shouts there. I know that I would definitely advocate for building young, but there have been some drafts that I've gone win now, and that's because I have had other owners who are so committed to going young, and I end up with Aaron Jones in the 13th round, and I just can't say no. If you are building older, which, it is a strategy, first of all I would ask is don't build old and then quit the league, because I know that's what a lot of people do as their strategy. That's not Dynasty. You're being a scumbag. That's playing redraft. But if you do want to go older, which is totally okay, I would not pay up. Travis Kelce's the exception, because he is just an absolute stonewall tight end 1. But otherwise, I'm not paying up for guys like Cooper Kupp. What I'm doing instead is I'm taking the 105, or I'm taking Devontae Smith, even if I want to go win now, because then I can go trade him for for several productive players later on. And it's not until the kind of 7th to 12th round where the high upside players are really gone. And that's where I'm choosing to take a guy like DeAndre Hopkins instead of a Kadarius Toney. That's where you can make the win now moves. But early on, you're just giving up way too much value and way too much flexibility. There's only going to be 1 or 2 teams that even could trade with you if your first, if your 2nd through 4th round picks are Christian McCaffrey, Travis Kelce, and Cooper Kupp, right? And it's okay. Like, that's a stacked lineup, but you need to have some more flexibility than that. So if you're going to build old, try to stay as young as possible early on. And then you're going to be able to supplement your team with guys like Derrick Henry, Aaron Jones, Amari Cooper, etc.
Right. And you always get worried about that guy where you see him take McCaffrey in the 2nd, and then, then they're taking old guy after old guy after old guy. And you're like, this is a little scary, it might not last. But to your point, when you're late there, I mean, I call it, I hate it, but I hate it, call it like Nico Collins syndrome, where you take Nico Collins over Amari Cooper because you're like, he's 22 and he's 28. Yeah. Last year in Smash 5, in the 9th round, I had 9, 12, and 10. Or no, wait, I forget what it was. It was like they were really ageist. It was like in that 8, 9 or 9, 10 wrap. I got Amari Cooper and DeAndre Hopkins because people were worried about the suspension with Hopkins and that Amari Cooper was leaving and there was no quarterback there, instead of taking guys like, that where they were stretching on. We always try to find those upsides, those diamonds in the rough. But honestly, guys, once you get to like round 14, these are these guys that are going to be 3rd round picks, these guys that are really tough sledding for them to get into an area where they're going to increase a ton of value.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that. So in my startup rankings, the end of my round 12 is where I would kind of designate the last players who I think have true upside. And that's where I have Darnell Mooney, Sky Moore, and the pick 211 and 212. After that, like you said, you're looking at 3rd rounders. You're looking at Nico Collins is in that next tier, Kareem Hunt, Elijah Mitchell, Dawson Knox. These are guys who are going to help your team, but that's really where the cutoff is of none of those guys are ever going to finish top. I mean, Knox is a tight end, so let's ignore that, but really top 12 in their position. None of them are ever going to get to top 10 in startup value, because that's what I'm really targeting, is that value. So I try to get, as I said, as many picks as I can in the first 10 to 12 rounds. And in the late rounds, all I'm doing is taking upside, because I have people asking me all the time, should I be taking, Dawson Knox or Okonkwo? you got to take a Okonkwo because there's no scenario where Dawson Knox becomes a top 10 startup value. Meanwhile, a Okonkwo could get up to the 5th round for all we know.
Mm-hmm.
He's got that upside. So you got to be targeting pure upside. And I love depth. You got to have depth to win a dynasty league. Hopefully you did that in the first 10 to 12 rounds by having those extra picks. But even if you didn't, you got to be shooting for upside, because if you do get a guy that hits, if Mark Andrews goes down and you took Isaiah Likely, all right, now you can flip him for a first, right? If you take pick 301 instead of an older guy like, DJ Chark, you're going to benefit if that 301 has one good week and now you can flip him for a 24 second. That's what you got to be doing later on in the drafts, with the obvious exception that if someone falls and, you get Tyler Lockett in the 16th round, then you got to take it.
I love that. We didn't even cover that or anything. We were just kind of spitballing, and we both had that same area. Mm-hmm. The other thing I always try to tell people is I see a lot of people really stretching for that third quarterback. They really try to push themselves up for instance, Jimmy Garoppolo goes in the 12th round.
Yeah.
Could he start? Yeah, sure. Is he going to give you a ton of value? No. It's not going to be there, where Sam Howell's going in the 15th, and guys this year's going to be, there's going to be a lot of fillers. A lot of guys that are going to be, potentially having to fill in spots. Last year in rounds 18, 19, I was taking your Gardner Minshew's and Tyler Huntley's, packaging them with a third and getting second round picks, so you can get value. Take some high upside backups rather than pay up for, a guy that's just going to keep you in a cycle of mediocrity, where it's what are you going to do with Jimmy Garoppolo? What are you ever going to get from him? Nothing.
It's backup quarterbacks, backup running backs, athletic tight ends, and really that's it. Because if a wide receiver is available in the 15th round, he is more than likely a roster clogger.
Right. Our 15th round it's Paris Campbell, it's Mecole Hardman, Kyle Phillips, as opposed to running backs in that area where you look at that's Deontay Foreman, Michael Carter, even they're not absolute studs, but they're guys where Deontay Foreman was filling in and giving you 15 points.
I got second round picks for Deontay Foreman. I got second round picks for Jalen Warren, guys like that. Alexander Madison now is, a prospective free agent like that. Those are you need to take people who could have some upside to flip them down the road, because taking a guy like Paris Campbell, who, he could fill in your flex, maybe get you 8 points on a bye week, but that's really never going to be worth anything. And all I'm doing with my dynasty teams, and that's a lot of what I do at Dynasty Diagnostics, is creating value, because ultimately you can flex the value however you want, but you want to build your bottom line to be able to decide, okay, now is the time where I can strike. It's the same as those for the basketball fans out there. If you look at what teams like the Thunder are doing, where they're just compiling assets, right? They're just they'll move back, and eventually, there's going to be a guy on the market where they can trade 3 firsts and 3 swaps and strike, and now is my time to win. Absolutely. That's what you got to be doing in Dynasty. You're building up the assets, you get younger and more valuable, and then ultimately there's going to be the aging team that they decided, it's time to rebuild. They got a bunch of 25-year-old studs. You can get them on the cheap, and then you're winning for years.
I love it, man. Hey, this was fun, and I hope you guys got a lot out of this. When I love to pick Mike's brain a lot. We talk a lot about how we do startups, how we do trades, and everything like that. And guys, I encourage you to check out his Patreon. I encourage you to check out ours. Ours right now, $3 gets you into the Discord, gets you access to myself and everyone else that's in there. And there's other tiers. There's tiers all the way up to, that you can have myself sit down and do a 15-minute strategy session with you every quarter and really kind of go over your teams and help out. So, we got a lot going on, but Mike's got even more. Tell him a little bit about what's going on with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Patreon's been flying recently, really enjoying it. I'm doing detailed reports on all of the rookies. And most excitedly, I'm also starting a podcast soon. So I know you and I have talked. We're going to have a lot of collaboration going forward, but keep a lookout for the Dynasty Zoltan podcast. We're going to be going in depth on every rookie. We're going to have a lot of analysts on that some of whom you might recognize, going 20 to 30 minutes on each rookie. In addition to that, I got my data model up. I got all my film grades out. Just check it out. Give me a follow on Twitter and hit me up. I love talking to all y'all.
I love it. Thanks again for tuning in, guys, and enjoy the process.